My name is Natalie Boorkis. I'm the Vice President of Conservation Partnerships for the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. And today we have a very special guest, very exciting. Scott over here, he's one of our panelists, will be speaking about what you all came to see, the Wildlife Resources Commission North Carolina Bird Atlas. Scott is the Science Support Coordinator for the Wildlife Diversity section of the NC Wildlife Resources Commission. He began his career working in the field on species like humpback whales, the northern goshawk, three-toed woodpecker, and burrowing owl. In 2003, he earned an MS in wildlife science from Oregon State University, working on Caspian terns in the Columbia River estuary. Soon after, he came to North Carolina to work for the State Wildlife Agency and be closer to family. He's worked here ever since, serving as data manager, state ornithologist, and now science support coordinator. Thanks, Scott, for being here with us tonight. Please take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay and see the screen? All right, everything's good. Awesome. Well, thanks to everyone who came. I appreciate it. And as Natalie mentioned, I'm here to talk about the Bird Atlas. This is a big project that we've been working on for the past couple of years, several years actually. And I'm excited to sort of talk to you about it. I will say, if you have questions as we go along, please put them in the chat, because I don't want to be rolling forward and have you 3 slides back trying to figure out what I was talking about. So, yeah. So let me know if you have any questions as we go along. I'm mostly going to talk about sort of what an atlas is, why we did an atlas, some of the ins and outs of things that we ask of people who contribute to the atlas, and a little bit about where we are right now. So awesome. Thank you. So yeah, we are so yeah, why did we start this project, this atlas project? We started several years ago thinking about an atlas, and eventually we got enough groundswell and interest to do it. And part of that was due to a 2019 paper in Science about the decline of birds in North America. You may be familiar with this. They documented that over 3 billion birds have been lost from the landscape since 1970. And the important part about this paper was that a lot of these species had declined, and the declines were undetected before this paper. And so a lot of work has been done actually since this paper came out to address this decline in species that's been detected across the country. And so this was one of the sparks for the atlas that we started. And as you know, in North Carolina, we are blessed with a variety of habitats, from spruce fir forests in the mountains to mixed hardwoods in the Piedmont, to longleaf pine in the sandhills, to our coastal, sandy beach and other habitats, marshlands on the coast. Such a wide variety of habitat types. And that means we host over 470 species of birds each year. And so this is an enormous number of species to keep track of. And we don't have, as a wildlife agency, we don't have the resources to even, do a drop in the bucket. So we have to prioritize the species that we do care about. So this is the second big reason why we decided to do an atlas, because we do need this conservation information. We want to detect declines in those common species or species that we may not have a good handle on. And so we thought an atlas was a good way to do that. So at its base, an atlas is a volunteer-powered systematic census of birds in a geographical region. For this particular atlas, we're talking about a state. So it's often the atlases are often done at a state level. Although you may be familiar with Mecklenburg County, who completed an atlas a couple of years ago, with a great big publication at the end of it, which is an amazing resource if you're in that region. Highly recommend looking that up and getting a hold of it. So we wanted to do a statewide atlas. The purpose of an atlas, and in our case, at very base, the very lowest bar we could get from it is a representative confirmation of the presence of species throughout the state and the confirmation of their breeding throughout the state. And so a lot of atlases do it just during the breeding season. Since we're a mid-Atlantic state and we get a lot of wintering species and breeding species, we chose to do our atlas both in the breeding season and the wintering season. So you can contribute to the atlas almost year round. So those are the big picture things. We hope to go further with the data that we collect. And so that's why we're hoping, we're giving people as many tools as possible so that the data we collect is really solid and really good quality, so that we could do things like estimate abundance of birds and make associations between where birds choose to nest and the habitat that's around them, so that we can really leverage this amazing data set we're going to end up with into the future. So another reason we chose to do an atlas, I talked about the sort of trend in birds. An atlas isn't really going to tell us trends, but it's a good mark in time about where populations are. And unfortunately, we don't have a previous atlas to compare to right now. So this is our first atlas, and you can see this map is some other states on the East Coast are on their second or even third atlas. And so this will be our first completed atlas on the East Coast. And so we're really excited to have this sort of baseline data, what will be baseline data, so that in future years, we'll do other atlases and maybe 5-10 years down the road, and we'll have a great way to compare where a good number of species are in terms of distribution and also abundance in our state. So one of the questions I often get about, can I participate in an atlas, is, do I have to be a birder? How good of a birder do I have to be? And I take a little bit of issue with the term birder. Most people think of the term of this kind of image when they think of a birder, somebody with a long, expensive camera with a long lens and binoculars and a field vest, and somebody who's really dedicated to birding. And don't get me wrong, those people are so welcome and so valuable to the atlas. We totally rely on a lot of people who may or may not look like that, but are super avid about birding and collecting data for the atlas. Super grateful for their participation. However, anybody at any level can participate in the atlas. And so I contend, perhaps controversially, that anyone can be a birder. And the reasons I think that anybody can appreciate birds is I got 3 reasons for it, actually. So first of all, birds are everywhere. It's hard not to see a bird. Birds evoke wonder, and birds connect us to the world we live in and also to others. And you probably know this, right? Where you walk outside and you can see a bird. It's an unusual day when you don't see a bird, right? Even if you spend most of your day inside, I see birds fly by. I hear birds call in the morning. Surprisingly, you can find nests everywhere. There's a nest right above where my car parks in the parking deck here in Raleigh. And so, the ubiquitousness of birds, I think, is a great argument to be a birder at whatever level that is. And also the wonder of birds, like the fact that they are everywhere and they can surprise you. And if you hear a bird in a bush or in a tree, and then you sort of narrow it down, and if you happen to have binoculars and you see that bird and you realize it's a bright yellow bird that I didn't notice was bright yellow until I brought binoculars to it. Or even noticing a Carolina wren carrying food to its nest in your backyard. Like, these are things that happen every day in the places that you walk through and inhabit all the time. And just the potential for sort of wonder and excitement and sort of curiosity that that evokes, I think is one of the great things about birds. And lastly, this piece about connection. Some of the birds that we see here in North Carolina travel thousands of miles to South and Central America to winter and spend an equal or more greater amount of time down there in the winter season, places that most of us have never been. And so I think it's just an amazing connection that we have, that you could see this bird in a tree and realize that it has, spent its winter way down south. And there are a lot of people who love birds. And so the possibility for connection with others, as you guys know, love of wildlife, has brought you together. And so I contend that, so do you have to be a birder? I say yes, you do. And I also think that everybody's a birder. So we welcome all skill levels to working on the Atlas. So what does atlasing look like? It could look like normal birding, where you're out and about and, chasing down species. Maybe you got a good pair of binoculars, maybe you're up really early, but it could also look like sitting on a park bench or sitting with birds. And one of the things, you notice I use the term here atlasing and not birding, because atlasing is a little bit different, and especially during the breeding season. I mentioned that we are hoping to confirm breeding for species in the state. And so that requires folks to really sit with birds for a while. And so you don't have to run around and tick off a bunch of species. We're asking more for you to spend more time with individuals and observe their behavior, observe what they're doing and what they might be, how they might be going about, and see if you can find any evidence for them breeding. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, what that might look like, what those things are. So it's not necessarily ticking off a really long list. You could contribute to atlasing by confirming breeding for a species in an area that hasn't been confirmed yet. And so it's a broad range. And so we do use this term atlasing for participating in the Atlas. All right, so where are we? I mentioned we started this project in or maybe I didn't, but we started this project in 2021. And so we've now gone through 3 full winter seasons, 3.5 winter seasons, and 3 full breeding seasons. And we're at the very beginning of our 4th breeding season for the Atlas. So we're getting near the end. The plan is, it's a 5-year project. So the plan is to be done collecting data in 2026. And then after that, we'll be using this incredible treasure trove of data. We are almost up to 3 million observations so far in the Atlas. So it's an enormous data set. And so we'll do a lot of data analysis and publishing after the end of our breeding season. So that's where we are right now. And so that's why we're reaching out to people. Again, we've got 2 breeding seasons left, and we have a lot to cover in those remaining 2 years. So just to give you a sense of where we've come, we started in 2021, and this map is an effort map that you can see on our website, and our website is ncbirdatlas.org. You'll see a lot of URLs in this presentation, but if you just remember ncbirdatlas.org, you can get to any of those URLs, any of the resources that I'll mention in this presentation. So just remember ncbirdatlas.org. So you'll see this map. Awesome. Thanks, Nelly. You'll see this map has a sort of gradation of, effort hours. So the amount of hours people have spent in that square. Those squares are what are called blocks. And, we've gridded off the entire state into blocks, but we don't have time or effort to do every block in the state. So we've chosen every 6th block, and that's what we call a priority block. And I'll talk a little bit about a bunch more about that later. I just wanted to cue you into that fact that we're not filling in the entire state. This is just a general indication of where we are the first year, and this is what happened during the second year. We filled in some of those gaps. And then on the third year, we filled in even more of those gaps. You can see some of those areas getting darker. People are spending more time in those blocks. And then this is how the map looked at the beginning of this year. So we've got a long way to go, but we've made significant progress in the last couple of years, and we think we're on track to being done. So at the end of 2026. All right, so as was mentioned in this talk, we are hoping to recruit some of y'all to help us out with this. And this is our ask, and I'll repeat it at the end so it has more, it has more context to it. But we're going to ask, chapters, if they can, to adopt and complete up to 5 priority blocks. And so I'll talk a little bit more about priority blocks in a bit and what that means to complete one. We hope that you could identify a point person, somebody who could be your resource for Atlas questions. And then we can provide support to each chapter by sort of narrowing down. You don't have to choose from all the blocks in the state. There are 937 of them. So there's even though it's only 1/6 of the blocks available, it's a lot. But we can narrow that down to you and give you a couple blocks that are in need of help, and even give you some advice on what to do in those blocks, exactly what needs to be done. And we can also provide you some more resources with that. So I'm just sort of being upfront about what we hope that y'all will be able to help with in the Atlas, and hopefully it'll make more sense as I go through how to Atlas. So how to Atlas you can break down into 4 pieces. We use the app, the smartphone app eBird for our data collection, and I'll talk a little bit about that. When you go into eBird, you're essentially creating checklists when you go for a hike, where you go sit in one place for a while to do your birding or your atlasing. You're going to start a checklist, and so we ask that those checklists be short and also in time and also in distance. And so we want to keep the data that you're collecting in a very small space, so that's more precise for us. We're going to ask atlasers to go to priority blocks, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And as I mentioned before, we'll ask you to record behaviors that you see of those birds that you observe. So in detail, what does that mean? eBird, hopefully most folks have heard of eBird. It's a very popular platform. It has over 2 million users. It's international. It's a free smartphone app that you can put on your phone, and it will, you can log all the species that you see in it. Whether you're working on an atlas or not, it's for everyone to use, and all of the data that goes into eBird is actually used for science and conservation. eBird has a lot of data products. It's run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and they have several you can peruse their website, ebird.org, and they have all sorts of data products out there, like mapping the abundance of species and the trends of species and everything. Some amazing resources out there. So anytime you contribute to eBird, you contribute to that data set. So all of our data collections in eBird. If you aren't familiar with eBird, and even if you are, I highly recommend this last bullet is take the eBird Essentials course. You can just Google it, and it's an amazing course. It's really good. It really tells you exactly how to operate eBird if you're not familiar. And you probably, even if you are familiar, you'll probably learn something new. I did the first couple times I watched it. So we're using eBird as a platform. eBird looks like this when you open it up. You can start what's called a checklist. If you click on Start a Checklist, this button down here, it'll open up the next screen that you see, which is a list of birds. That list of birds, and it's usually the most common species for the location you're in, since your phone knows where you are. You can, up in this top bar, you could type in a 1 and Canada goose, and it would and it will record that you've seen one Canada goose. And so it's very simple to use. And I'll keep coming back to these screens so you'll see what this looks like for all the other pieces that we're talking about. So I mentioned that all of this data goes to eBird, but there's a way you can mark your eBird data to say, hey, I really want this to go to the North Carolina Bird Atlas. That's really important to us because it knows that when you're out there birding and you're recording the species that you're seeing, that you're keeping in mind the things that we are interested in with the North Carolina Bird Atlas. And the way to do that is to change a setting in eBird so that your data is submitted to our portal, what's called our portal. And so in that familiar left screen there where you're on a start a checklist, if you go to the more screen and then settings, you'll come to this next one. And at the very bottom, it says portal, and it usually says eBird. And once you click on that eBird down there, you'll see a whole list of other portals that are available. And you just find North Carolina Bird Atlas and select that one. And then the next time you open up your eBird app, you'll see this portal North Carolina Bird Atlas on there. So you know that your data is going to us and going to be used by us. So we're using eBird, and we hope that you'll submit to our portal. That makes it so much easier for us to track which data is being collected. And again, the instructions for this are actually on our website. I think it's change-portal.ncbirdatlas.org, but you can also find it there if you just go to ncbirdatlas.org. All right, so that's using eBird. So you might ask, eBird's already collecting this data. Why don't we just use the data that's already being collected? And the reason is because this is a map of eBird in a non-Atlas year. I think this was 2020, so the year before we started doing the Atlas. And you can see the patterns in this map already, right? Like, it's not where the birds are, it's where the birders are. There's this hot spots around these urban areas in Charlotte and in Asheville and the Triad and Triangle and Wilmington, and even the highways. You can see really clearly through here where people are spending most of their time and doing their checklists. And so that's the problem with regular eBird data, is that it's not evenly distributed across the state. And so in an atlas, we're asking people to go to a subset of, or a representative sample of the state. And the way we're doing that is by using priority blocks. So we've chosen 937 of these blocks. They're evenly distributed throughout the state. And so there's likely one near you. And they're all getting various levels of effort depending on, obviously the ones near towns and cities are getting more work. But we do have a resource for you to know where these are. And that's this block map here. And if you go to blocksignup.ncbirdatlas.org, you'll see this interactive map. And you can see this map has some blue priority blocks and some red priority blocks. The red ones have been adopted by people, and adopting just means I've committed to making sure this block gets all the data that it needs in order to be done. And I'll talk a little bit about what those criteria look like later. But this map has some really great resources on it. It's got, you can actually see the locations of all the eBird checklists. You can look at aerial photo. You can look at other kinds of base maps. You can look at property ownership if you want to try and get permission to go on a private property. There's all sorts of resources for this stuff. And I should also mention at this point, like, we're asking for help with this, but we're not just sending you out on your own. There are plenty of ways for you to connect with us, ask questions, ask for a little bit more guidance. And so there's plenty of, this is not a one, we're just handing this off to you and having it done. We're hoping that we can engage you in a two-way conversation about working on the Atlas. If you zoom in a little bit, this is what an example priority block looks like. This is a very urban example. Some of our blocks are super rural and some are very urban. When you go to that map, you can also, when you click on a block, there are actually PDFs of each of the blocks. And so you could see the block outlines, print them out and carry them out in the field if you wanted to. I'll show you another way of locating yourself within a block as well. But this is an example of the size. You can get a feel for how big a block is. It's 9 miles by 9 miles. So it's not a small area, but it's doable. And this is near Greensboro. So we're hoping people can, you don't have to go everywhere in the block, but we're hoping that folks can sample a representative sample of the types of habitats there. So there's a couple ponds. We'd hope that you'd visit one of those. Some of those woodlots, you could go to some of those woodlots, even some of the urban fields, you could go to those too. You don't have to go to every one, just make sure you go to at least one of them within the block. So when you're in the eBird app, and you're in that checklist, creating a checklist, in the upper left corner there's an icon. If you tap on that icon, it will show you the block boundaries and actually where you are within that block. And so, and it tells you the name of the block as well. So there's a way to locate yourself inside the block and make sure you don't want to cross over a block while you're doing a checklist. So it's a really handy feature that's within eBird that helps you navigate that. So I showed you this map before. This is the regular eBird data map, and I kind of wanted to show you where we are now after 4 years of this work, sort of what we've done to sort of transform this map. And so in November of 2023, this is what our map looks like. The blue dots are the ones submitted to the Atlas. So those are the ones that are going into the portal that I mentioned. And you can even see the pattern of those priority blocks here, right? You can see all these clusters of checklists throughout the state that people have submitted to those areas. So we're really excited that we're starting to see this pattern on a lot of these checklists across the state. So, all right. So we use eBird. We prefer you go to priority blocks. Talked a little bit about that. And the third piece was minimize the distance and duration of your checklists. And again, a checklist is just, you're either sitting still or you're going for a hike. If you go for a hike or a walk, make sure it's less than a mile. And if you reach a mile and you're still birding, you can stop a checklist and start it again. If it's been over an hour, again, you could stop a checklist and start it again. So if you're walking through the woods and you come to a big field, you might consider stopping your checklist and start when you go into the new field. So you got a new habitat and try a new checklist. I also ask that you submit a complete checklist. And this is one of those things that's really well explained in that eBird Essentials course. So I highly recommend that. But a complete checklist is essentially you're attesting that, like, hey, everything I could identify, I recorded in this list. You may have seen a bird that goes by and you're like, I don't know what that was. It was a little brown thing. It went in a corner, or even one you got a really good look at, but you couldn't figure out what it was. You can still mark it as a complete checklist. What they want you to avoid is, yeah, I saw some chickadees, but I decided not to put them on there because I see chickadees everywhere. You couldn't really mark if you knew there were chickadees there, you couldn't really mark your checklist as complete. So we want you to submit complete checklists if possible. Okay, and lastly, behavior codes. So this is the fun part for me, is spending time with the birds and actually observing what they're doing, going beyond the sort of, oh yeah, it's a prairie warbler, or it's a common yellowthroat, or it's a mallard or a wood duck or whatever. What is that bird doing? Like what is it doing with its time in the location you're at? So again, you have this checklist on the left that you're, recording your birds in. And once you click on that add observation or find species, you'll come to this next screen on the right. This is in this example, they've selected Canada goose. You put like, oh, I saw one Canada goose. Uh, and then you'll see down lower down it says add a breeding code. I see a question here. Can one use something like Merlin bird ID to identify by sound and then tag the checklist? I wouldn't rely solely on Merlin. Merlin's really great for identifying and learning bird songs. I would recommend if Merlin says, whatever, common yellowthroat, I would try and locate that bird and at least see it with your own eyes so that you can confirm that's what it was that was calling. I've seen Merlin actually, mockingbirds are known for doing the calls of other birds, and I've seen Merlin sort of tick off the birds that the mockingbird is imitating. And so there are times when it's not super super reliable. For the most part, though, Merlin is a really incredible resource and is spot on. But at this point, I think we're still pretty comfortable. Hopefully you have enough time, like, oh, I see that bird, and you can sort of recognize whatever the call was and try and locate it and get your eyes on it to confirm it. So yeah, great question. So recording bird behaviors, there's this add breeding code option in the screen there. If you click on that screen right there, you'll see a list of these codes. Now, don't get scared off. There's 27 of them, but you don't have to know all of them. I'm going to highlight 5 of the most common ones that you can that are really easy to know and identify and check off. So all 27 of these fall into one of 4 categories, and they're essentially designed to document the confidence you have that that bird is breeding in that location, going from observed, possible, probable, or confirmed. No doubt, it's definitely breeding there. So obviously, we want to get as many confirmed as possible, but that's just not going to happen. So they're all coded by these colors, and this sort of orientation of dots is what you would see in the eBird app. So of the 5, I'll highlight. First one's a really easy one, a singing bird. Like if you see a songbird singing in a mating context, it's in habitat, it's like doing this little call, especially like as migration's ending and you're finding birds out there doing their song, not little chips or calls or anything. You want to hear like their breeding song. Then you can mark that bird as an S. That's a possible breeder. So usually if it's in the habitat it's supposed to be in, if it's a, Henslow sparrow, it's out in a field somewhere and not in sort of breeding locations. But if you're solidly also in the breeding season, that's good too. Or a barred owl calling from your backyard, that counts as well. Or anywhere else you hear an owl calling. Woodpeckers drumming also count, not just feeding, but like the, staccato sort of, that's a function of mating. They're trying to show off their prowess by drumming. So any of those count for a singing bird. Easiest one to mark off, but it's also the lowest likelihood that that bird is breeding. One way to easily go from singing or from a possible singing code to a probable singing code, if you go out to a location and you hear a bird, and then a week later you go back to that same location and you hear that same species, you can mark it as what is called S7, like singing bird is present for at least 7 days. That's a really easy way to sort of up your confidence that that species is breeding within that block. So you have to go back to the same location at least 7 days later and record that same species singing. So that's a real easy one. And you could look at a block and see the list of species that have been seen there, and you have to be the one to go there twice, but yeah. All right, so this is number 3, carrying nesting material. Again, pretty straightforward. If you see a bird carrying a stick, then it counts as carrying nesting material. Especially if it's going to an unseen nest. If you see the nest, you can use a nest code. There's a nest code in there too. One caveat to this one is that you can't use this one for wrens because they build nests all over the place, and so it's not as high of a likelihood that they're breeding. So any other bird other than a wren carrying nesting material, this one counts. Carrying food, this is another one that you can see. So it's an adult carrying food for young or an incubating partner. One of the tips is to look for repeated visits, like from a location into the bush or back, getting food and going back and getting food and going back. That's pretty strong indication, and that you can easily assign this sort of carrying food comment for that. It's not, can't be used. The caveat for this one, you can't use it for crows and other corvids, and you can't use it for raptors or terns because they carry food all the time, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're nesting. So, and then the last two I'll mention is the really easy ones. If you find a nest with eggs or you find a nest with young, definitely breeding. So, and a lot of these can be seen, like barn swallows, you can find those, or other swallows you can find under bridges. And so those are easy ones to confirm that, you find an active nest that, and whether it has eggs or young in it. So if there are no birds seen, there's another code called UN in there. And I should mention, all of these codes are at this URL at the bottom here, with even longer help descriptions under them that really give a lot of information about what each of these codes mean. So those are the 5 top ones. It's like singing bird, a singing bird that you go back a week later and you record that it's still there, the same species. Carrying nesting material, if it's not a wren. Carrying food, if it's not a raptor or a crow or a corvid or a tern. And nest with eggs and nest with young. So those are the behaviors, the top ones. You can check out the other ones as well. They're also very useful. So that's how to atlas. We want you to use eBird. We want you to put it into the portal. We want to minimize the distance and duration that you spend on each checklist, just so we have a small thing. We want you to go to priority blocks, those areas of the state distributed across the state. And we want you to record behaviors as you're doing that. So spend time with the birds, record those behaviors that you see. Well, we're not leaving you out in the cold here. We got plenty of resources for you to remember all this information that I've sort of touched on through this presentation. And the first thing is we have a field guide out there. We have hard copy field guides, but we also have it available on our website. You'll see these panels look really familiar because they make up most of my presentation here. It tells you all about those atlasing basics I went over, those 5 things that we ask that you do. There's a schedule for what you might expect during certain times of the year for when to visit your block. There's a whole list of the breeding codes, available breeding codes there, very short explanation for them, not really in depth, but all we could fit on a card. There's some good tips there for to keep in mind while you're atlasing. If you how to do checklists, locations. You can even attach, if you're unsure about a bird and you can take a picture of it through your binoculars or spotting scope, you can attach those to the checklist as well. If you do like a nest observation, like it's a bluebird nest in a box, you could take a picture of that and attach it as well. All sorts of options you can do there. There's a couple suggestions there for tricky codes as well, tricky behavior codes that often trip people up. And then the last one is completing a block. So I've mentioned we're, asking folks to bird in these specific blocks throughout the state. And the whole idea is to spread out effort. And so in order to spread out effort, we want to be able to tell you that block is done, move on to another one, because that one's got a reasonable amount of data that will do well. And so we can move on to another block that has less data in it. And so that's what these criteria are here on the right. Essentially, what we're asking is that we hope that each block has at least 55 species that have those behavior codes associated with them. And we want people to spend at least 20 hours birding in the breeding season in those blocks, which pretty much if you can do these other criteria, then you will have some, it doesn't have to be one person, it could be anybody, and it has to be over 5 years. So these are criteria over 5 years. You don't have to do this in a single year. Have at least 5 visits. And then for those codes that go into those categories, we want you to have at least 25% confirmed. Definitely want to confirm in the confirmed category. We want to have at least 20 or fewer than 25% in the possible category. So those are sort of our limits for the categories of coded species that we'd like to see in there. We don't want a whole bunch of possibles and not really be sure that birds are breeding in that location. For nocturnal species, we hope that people have time and ability to go out at night and do a couple nocturnal surveys, but it's not required for completing the block. And as I mentioned before, with that map of the block, you can, we hope that you can sort of get a representative sample of the habitats that exist within that block. So once those are all sort of fulfilled, then we can mark it as complete and then move on to the other. And so that's part of the criteria that we was talking about at the top there. Another resource that we have is this Block Explorer. This tells you detailed information about each of the blocks. You'll see a whole map of the block, and I can actually demonstrate this for you. We have some time. You'll see a map of the block. You can zoom in and zoom out, and it will tell you the statistics on the bottom left there. It will tell you exactly whether you've met those criteria that I was just talking about in the previous slide. You know, is that completed or not? And you can see this particular block, it says under possible, it says it's 34% of the coded species are possible. And so one strategy would be to go out to this block and try and upgrade the ones that have been seen as singing, and then come back a week later and try and upgrade them to S7, and that would lower the number of possible codes in that one. If you scroll down a little bit further in this in the browser, you'll actually see the entire list of species that have been seen in that block and what their breeding codes are, or their the highest breeding category that they have. So you've got that as well in terms of what species have been there. Other support options that we do have volunteer regional coordinators, and these folks can go out with you, answer questions, help you diagnose like what to do in a particular block. In addition, you can contact one of us. I put an email at the end of the slide, but it's coordinator@ncbirdatlas.org. We monitor that. We collectively monitor that email account. And so, but we have folks across the state who can also help out. All of these names are also on our Atlas website. Yeah, thank you. At ncbirdatlas.org. If you go there, you'll eventually get to this URL about the Atlas team. Has all of these people and their contact information on there as well. So again, I mentioned we're in year 4 or 5, and so this is kind of where we are right now. This was actually done at the end of last year. Only 35 of our 937 blocks have reached all the, it's actually higher than that now, it's closer to 40, but we have a long way to go to get all of them actually complete. Now that looks really dire, but we have a lot of data in a lot of these blocks, and so they're still, so we're a good ways along. It just doesn't feel like it with only 35 of 40 of them being complete. But you can see those criteria on the right, like 24% of them have over 20 hours. 44, almost half of them have over 55 species in them, and 32% have the correct amount of confirmations. And so, we're making progress, and that number sounds scary, but I think we're on track to completing in another 2 years. But that's why we're reaching out to y'all, because we're hoping that chapters can commit to anywhere from 1 to 5 blocks and adopt that block and commit to seeing it through until the end of we got 2 more breeding seasons to see those complete. If you can identify a point person in that chapter that could help with coordinating those blocks, that would be great. And as I mentioned before, we are here to help support you in figuring out, giving you a list of blocks to choose from, so you're not starting with 937 of them. We would give you 10 of them to choose near your chapter area of responsibility. And then, of course, we're also here to offer guidance if you want some more targeted information about how to complete those blocks. We're here for that as well. And so that's what I have for our presentation tonight. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm also happy to demonstrate to go to our website and some of those other resources and show you how those work. So I'll start with if anybody has any questions, and then you can move on to demonstrations if people don't.
And if anyone wants to, instead of typing in a question, if you want to raise your hand, I can also allow individuals to speak. So if you have anything that you're really excited about asking, please raise your hand and let us know.
Yeah, I can certainly make, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. It sounds like there's also going to be a recording of it, but I can make a PDF version that you can scroll through as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, and I will be after we're done here today, in the next week or so, I'll be sending up a follow-up email to everybody that was registered with a link to the video recording and any of the useful links that you shared, Scott, and the PowerPoint as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I can show you. I didn't actually have a screen grab of our website. Can you guys can see this, right? This is what our website looks like. It's our own little corner of eBird. And it has all those things I mentioned here: breeding codes, Atlas Essentials is a great place to see that effort map I showed you, instructions on how to change your portal in eBird. That block sign up map is here as well. What the criteria for completing a block. Actually, we don't have the block explorer on here, but that's in here somewhere. And you can actually look on eBird. If I go to a particular block like this one, it will show me all the species that have been seen in that block, and has the numbers up here. These numbers are more up to date than our block explorer, just because of the way we get our data. But this is a great resource for you to just quickly see what species have been seen. So if there is one that's like this double-crested cormorant, well, that's a wintering species. So, but the song sparrow is a possible breeder. That's one you might target to go back to this block and get a higher breeding code for that particular species. And then, then the effort map goes to this map, which I showed you the screen before. If you zoom in, it'll actually denote which ones are priority blocks. These are the priority blocks. These ones with the extra, anything that's black has been completed so far. We have a little bit of update to do for some of these completed blocks, but yeah, so we're making headway. And then this block, yeah, when you go to that block, this is the block sign up map that you can go to. And if you have to click this thing to say you acknowledge, but this is another interactive map, and you can zoom in. One thing I wanted to show you on here, which I mentioned really quickly, if you click on a block, there are these PDFs of like a satellite map. You could actually Um, if you open up this map that I just downloaded, um, it's a PDF that you could actually print out, and you can actually get an app called Avenza and put it on your phone as well. But this could help you orient yourself in the field. But there's also all sorts of resources layers that you can turn on and off for a particular block. If I zoom into this block right here, you can even look at this heritage program managed areas that tells you what layers are in conservation and which ones aren't. There's land cover, there's all sorts of information out here. So worth a little bit of tinkering with to see what's been done. And then lastly is this this Atlas Explorer, which is a website that similar, you see the same blocks on here, but I can click on one of these blocks and it shows me shows me the statistics for that particular species or that particular block. This one needs a lot more work. It just even coded species in it. So you could look at this and be like, even if I go out there and record a bunch of singing birds, that would help out this particular block. So, and then as I mentioned, you can scroll down and you see the entire list of birds and what their breeding status is down below. One other thing I'll mention about this particular website is we've got up-to-date species maps, so you can even see the status of where we are in terms of mapping a species. This is the Acadian flycatcher, so you can see that where it's been confirmed and where it's just been from where it's been observed. So so we're already got some sort of tentative final products out there for people to see, where these birds are breeding throughout the state. Some of these birds are harder to confirm breeding than others, but we have this for pretty much all the species in North Carolina. So let's see where barred owl is. Yeah. So yeah, that's a quick run through of those websites. So any other questions anybody has?
I mean, I think I don't see any questions on there. I think this is
Okay.
all awesome information. I think some questions that we had received when we first brought this to some of the chapter folks were covered in your presentation, which was, this is a lot of technical stuff. There's a lot of breeding codes, but to know that those 5 are attainable and you don't necessarily have to know all 27 of them, I think
Right. Yeah.
eases a lot of fears.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's actually really surprising how many nesting birds you can see. Like you can just drive down the road and I've seen like, swallows flying in and out of a barn or something like that, or, like those kinds of things that would count, if you could drive through a rural, it's not all traipsing through the woods and chasing down an ovenbird nest, which is really hard. It can be easier as well for some of those species. So yeah,
Right.
but it's definitely intimidating.
Yeah, you just have to break it up into smaller pieces.
Yeah.
And so knowing that there's that priority blocks, 5 specific breeding codes, and that there are regional people that are available to help and potentially come out to, say, a chapter event, where you're doing a walk or just, you're atlasing, and even if it's standing in one spot as a group, I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I should also mention, we're sort of augmenting volunteers with temporary technicians. And so every year we hire a slew of birders who go out and, pretty much spend the entire summer doing this atlas work and going to different blocks. So, so yeah, we just finished hiring our folks for this year, but next next sort of November, December, we'll be looking to hire another cadre of people for the last breeding season. So
How many
if
people did
anybody's,
you hire this time around?
we have a total of 15 3-month people who will be here for just the 3 months of the breeding season. And so, yeah. Yeah, so it's a good number of people.
Yeah, and I interrupted you when you said you're probably gonna need people later on as well. So
Yeah, we're definitely going to hire some number next year. I don't know exactly how many. It depends on how well this year goes. So yeah, when we get into the last year, and we'll be really really chugging towards the end, and hopefully getting all the data that we need.
nice. Yeah, well, I did had one more question for you. I saw
Sure.
Region 5, the Forsyth, potentially Guilford area. That's currently an open position as far as regional people.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, if anybody is interested in that, you could send it to that coordinator.ncbirdatlas.org. We actually have 3 permanent staff at NC Wildlife that are in charge of each region. So we have Lee Sherrill in the mountains, and CC King in the Piedmont, and John Carpenter on the coast, who are sort of running the show for those regions. So helping with coordinators. A good question. What happens if the priority box aren't completed? We're going to complete them. um, I'm pretty confident we'll complete them. I mean, I don't, we'll get by with if for some reason we don't, it's still going to be the best data set of its kind for North Carolina. It already is, really. So, there was an effort back in the 80s to do an atlas, but you can imagine how hard this kind of work was back before the internet and before you could have these dynamic maps and all this guidance for people. It was literally sending index cards with information on them. And so that effort didn't make it all the way through and didn't have a significant amount of data. But I guess my point being, like, we have an amazing amount of data already. So, but we really want to fill in those gaps in those blank areas to match some of the more urban and well-traveled areas. So that's our biggest focus right now.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to make note that I think some of our participants on this call today are part of chapters, and some are chapter leaders. So if there's any questions that you have following this presentation, please feel free to reach out. And
Yeah,
those of you that are not part of a chapter, this, like Scott said earlier, this is still an opportunity that you can take part of as an individual. Yeah,
absolutely. And I put my email in there as well. Like I see all the coordinator emails, but if you want to send one to me directly, that's fine too.
thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Scott.
Yeah,
This was great, and I'm sure that we'll probably have questions later on. Hope,
absolutely.
hopefully we'll have a few folks reach out with interest from the chapters, and we can make it happen.
Sounds great.
Um, yeah, just it takes a lot of people to
It
gather
does.
all of this data, and our I think where our strength lies is in our volunteer base, and
Absolutely.
so we're grateful for this opportunity to partner, and we're excited.
You know what? I completely forgot to mention. I can't believe I forgot this. We also have a monthly newsletter. So if you're interested in subscribing to our newsletter, I think it's, hold on, let me make sure this works. Uh, wow, I can't believe I almost spaced that one. Oh, no, that's not it. Uh, if you go to our webpage, though, you can find under Atlas Essentials, you can find our newsletter. We call it the Quackalacky. And if you go to I'll put the URL in the chat here. If you go there, you can subscribe to our newsletter. You can look at back issues there as well. So, yeah.
It's a great name.
Man, I can't believe I almost forgot that.
Can't forget the
Yeah.
quack.
Quackalacky.
All right. Well,
Yeah. Awesome.
thank you. Thank you, Scott. Thanks everyone for calling in. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your evening.
Yeah. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you.